Look at the map of the Eastern Mediterranean. Zoom in on the Aegean Sea. You see a chaotic scatter of thousands of islands, some large like Crete and Rhodes, some tiny specks of rock like Castellarizo, painting the sea in blue and white. Now spin the globe halfway around the world. Look at the map of the South China Sea and the approaches to Australia. You see the same thing, a complex littoral environment cluttered with reefs, shoals and islands, sitting astride the most important trade routes on Earth. To the casual observer, Athens and Canberra are worlds apart. One is the cradle of Western civilization, sitting in the shadow of the Acropolis. The other is a young nation on the edge of the Pacific frontier. But if you strip away the culture and look purely at the strategic geometry, Greece and Australia are fighting the exact same war. They are the bookends of the West. Greece holds the line in Europe. Australia holds the line in Asia. And they are both facing an identical enemy. I don't mean they are fighting the same country. I mean they are fighting the same archetype. Both nations are locked in a struggle against a revisionist power, a large, authoritarian neighbor that believes history made a mistake, and is willing to break international law to fix it. In the Pacific, Australia faces the People's Republic of China, a superpower that claims the Nine-Dash Line, a cartographic fiction that attempts to turn international waters into a Chinese lake. In the Mediterranean, Greece faces Turkey, a regional power that claims the blue homeland, weaponized, a doctrine that ignores the sovereignty of Greek islands to claim half the Aegean Sea. The maps look different, but the greed is the same. The rhetoric is the same. And the stakes for the rules-based order are identical. If either of these lines break, if Greece cedes the Aegean or Australia cedes the Pacific, the concept of international law is dead. The world returns to the law of the jungle, where the strong take what they can and the weak suffer what they must. Welcome to Doctrine of War. Today we are conducting a geopolitical masterclass. The thesis for this episode is that the struggle for the Aegean and the struggle for the Pacific are not isolated events. They are two fronts of a single global contest between order and chaos. We are going to prove that the tactics used by Ankara are a carbon copy of the tactics used by Beijing. We are going to show you how Greece and Australia have inadvertently built identical strategies to survive. This is the story of two democracies separated by 10,000 miles, who have found themselves standing as the guardians of the gates. Let's dig into the map war. In the Pacific, we all know the story. China looks at the map, sees the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea UNCLOS, and shreds it. They draw a line around 90% of the South China Sea and say, "This is ours because our fishermen were here 500 years ago." They ignore the exclusive economic zones (EZ) of the Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia. They ignore the sovereignty of nations to navigate the high seas. Now look at the Aegean. Turkey does the exact same thing. Under UNCLOS, every island has an EZ. This means the Greek islands of the Aegean generate a continental shelf that connects to Cyprus. This effectively boxes Turkey into its coastline. Ankara hates this. So, they invented the blue homeland. They drew a map that simply erases the rights of Greek islands. They claim that islands like Castellarizo, which is inhabited and clearly Greek, have zero maritime jurisdiction. They argue that the Turkish continental shelf extends hundreds of miles south, cutting Greece off from Cyprus and Egypt. It is a fantasy map. It has no basis in law. It is exactly as ridiculous as China claiming the waters off the coast of Borneo. But just like China, Turkey backs up its fantasy map with steel. In Beijing, they call it the century of humiliation, the idea that China was robbed by colonial powers and must reclaim its rightful place. In Ankara, they call it the Treaty of Lausanne syndrome, the belief that the 1923 treaty that defined modern Turkey was a mistake that stripped them of their Ottoman greatness. Both nations are driven by a revanchist nostalgia. They want to turn back the clock. And the only things standing in their way are the navies of Greece and Australia. This psychological link is crucial. When President Erdogan speaks about the borders of our heart, he sounds exactly like President Xi speaking about rejuvenation. They are leaders who view the ocean not as a shared global commons, but as territory to be conquered. For a strategic realist, this simplifies the problem. We don't need to analyze Greek-Turkish history or Sino-Australian trade relations in isolation. We just need to recognize the pattern. A revisionist power pushes until it hits steel. If it hits mush, it keeps pushing. If it hits steel, it stops. Greece and Australia have decided to become steel. The gray zone tactics. But these powers are smart. They don't start World War III. They don't launch a D-Day invasion that would trigger a NATO Article 5 response or an ANZUS treaty intervention. Instead, they use gray zone tactics. They operate just below the threshold of war. They use salami slicing, taking small pieces day by day until they own the whole sausage. The parallels in the playbook are chilling. It is almost as if the Turkish and Chinese admirals are reading from the same manual. First, consider the research vessel tactic. In 2020, the Eastern Mediterranean almost exploded into war. Turkey sent the Oryx Reis, a seismic research vessel, into waters claimed by Greece to look for gas. It wasn't really looking for gas. It was looking for a fight. The ship was escorted by half the Turkish navy. Greece responded by deploying its own fleet. For months, the two navies maneuvered within meters of each other. At one point, the Greek frigate Limnos physically collided with the Turkish frigate Kemal Reis, tearing a hole in the Turkish ship's hull. It was the closest NATO has come to a civil war in decades. Now look at the Pacific. China does the exact same thing. They send research vessels like the Yuan Wang class into the EEZs of Australia, India, and the Philippines. They claim they are mapping the seabed for science. In reality, they are mapping submarine routes and asserting jurisdiction. They send survey ships into Australian waters to track exercises. In both cases, the aggressor uses a civilian ship as a shield. If Greece or Australia shoots at the research vessel, they look like the aggressor. Why did you shoot? We were just doing science. It is a trap designed to force the defender to fire the first shot. Second, consider the weaponized militia. China is famous for its maritime militia, the Little Blue Men. These are fishing boats that are actually commanded by the PLA Navy. They swarm disputed reefs, blocking resupply missions and intimidating local fishermen. They act as a paramilitary force that gives China plausible deniability. Turkey has developed its own version. They don't just use fishing boats, they use weaponized migration. We saw this in the Evros land border crisis and we see it in the Aegean. Turkish Coast Guard vessels have been filmed escorting dinghies full of desperate migrants into Greek waters, effectively using human beings as ammunition to overwhelm Greek defenses. And recently, Turkish fishing boats have become increasingly aggressive, ramming Greek Coast Guard vessels. It is the same swarm tactic. It creates a constant low-level crisis that exhausts the defender. The goal of these tactics is desensitization. If Turkey violates Greek airspace 50 times a day, which they do, eventually the world stops caring. It becomes normal. If China builds a bunker on a reef, eventually the world accepts it as a fait accompli. This is the boiling frog strategy. And both Greece and Australia have realized that the only way to stop it is to turn off the heat. You have to escalate to de-escalate. You have to show that you are willing to risk a collision, willing to risk a crisis to hold the line. The incident with the Limnos proved that Greece was willing to bang hulls. Australia's aggressive intercepts of Chinese ships and aircraft show the same resolve. The gray zone is only effective if the defender is afraid of the gray. Greece and Australia have decided to live in the gray. The shield strategy. So, how do you fight a giant? How does a nation of 10 million, Greece, hold off a nation of 85 million, Turkey? How does a nation of 26 million, Australia, hold off a nation of 1.4 billion, China? You don't try to match them man for man. You build a porcupine defense. You make yourself so spiky, so dangerous to swallow, that the predator decides to go eat something else. Greece has executed one of the most rapid and impressive rearmament programs in European history. After a decade of economic crisis, Athens scraped together the cash to buy the absolute best hardware on the market. They bought the French Rafale fighter jet. This was a strategic masterstroke. The Rafale carries the Meteor missile, a ramjet-powered air-to-air weapon that has a no-escape zone, 3 times larger than anything in the Turkish inventory. In a literal sense, a Greek Rafale can kill a Turkish F-16 before the Turkish pilot even knows he is in a fight. Then they bought the FDI Belhara frigates. These ships are digital killers. They are equipped with the Seafire AESA radar and Aster 30 missiles. A single Belhara can create an air denial bubble over the entire Aegean. It can track hundreds of targets and shoot down anything from a drone to a ballistic missile. This is the shield of the Aegean. It turns the sea into a no-go zone for the Turkish Navy. Now look at Australia. The strategy is identical. We call it anti-access/area denial, A2/AD. Australia is buying the Naval Strike Missile, NSM, to put on its destroyers. We are buying the HIMARS system to put on land. We are buying nuclear submarines, AUKUS, to hunt in the deep ocean. The philosophy is the same: quality over quantity. Technological overmatch to compensate for numerical inferiority. Greece and Australia are both betting on the first shot advantage. They know they will be outnumbered in a full-scale war. So, they are buying systems that ensure they win the first exchange so decisively that the enemy cannot recover. And there is one piece of technology that binds them together: the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. Australia already operates the F-35. Greece has been approved to buy it. This is a game changer. Why? Because the F-35 isn't just a plane, it is a data link. In the near future, a Greek F-35 flying over Crete could theoretically share data with an Australian F-35 flying over a joint exercise in the Mediterranean. They speak the same digital language. They are nodes in the same Western battle network. This creates a standardized shield. It means that the tactics developed by RAF pilots in the Pacific can be taught to Hellenic Air Force pilots in the Aegean. It creates a unified Western way of war that the authoritarian powers cannot replicate. Turkey was kicked out of the F-35 program because they bought Russian missiles. China cannot build anything close to the F-35's engine performance. The bookends of the West have the ultimate technological edge, and they are sharpening it every day. This rearmament isn't just about buying toys. It is a signal. When Greece signs a defense pact with France, or when Australia signs AUKUS with the UK and US, they are weaving a web of alliances that surrounds the aggressor. Greece has turned the port of Alexandroupoli into a massive US logistics hub, bypassing the Turkish Straits to supply Eastern Europe. Australia is turning Darwin and Perth into US hubs for the Pacific. They are essentially saying to the superpowers, "We are your unsinkable aircraft carriers. Use us." The conclusion. Why does this matter to the average person? Why should a guy in Texas, or a banker in London, or a farmer in New Zealand care about a rock in the Aegean or a reef in the Pacific? Because these are the front lines. The world runs on trade. 90% of everything you own came on a ship. The Mediterranean is the highway for energy flowing to Europe. The Pacific is the highway for goods flowing to America and Australia. Greece protects the Mediterranean trade routes. Australia protects the Pacific trade routes. They are the unsleeping sentinels. If Greece falls, if the Aegean becomes a blue homeland, then Europe's southern flank is exposed. Energy security is held hostage by a revisionist power. NATO is broken. If Australia falls, if the Pacific becomes a 9-dash line, then the global economy is held hostage by the CCP. The US is pushed back to Hawaii. These two nations are holding the line not just for themselves, but for the concept of civilization itself. They are holding the line for the idea that a small country has the same rights as a big country. They are holding the line for the idea that the ocean belongs to everyone, not just the guy with the most ships. While the rest of the West argues about politics, while Berlin dithers and Paris philosophizes, Greek pilots are intercepting Turkish jets over the Aegean every single day. Australian sailors are challenging Chinese warships in the South China Sea every single day. They are tired. They are outnumbered. But they are not backing down. The similarities between the Aegean and the Pacific are not a coincidence. They are evidence of a grand pattern. The enemies of the West smell weakness. They are pushing against the doors. But in Athens and Canberra they found the doors locked. They found nations that remembered their history, from Salamis to Gallipoli, from Kokoda to Korea. They found nations that understand that freedom isn't free, and that sometimes to keep the peace you have to prepare for war. The geography is different. The enemy is different. But the war is the same. And Greece and Australia are winning it. Thanks for watching Doctrine of War. Do you see the parallels between Erdogan and Xi? Is the Porcupine defense enough to stop them? Let us know in the comments below. Stay sharp, stay realistic, and we'll see you in the next one.